I think actually this is a really good context for what capitalism is. Can you then tell us what socialism is and what Marxism is as well?
Yeah, sure. What, 10 words or less, right?
Yeah, 10 were absolutely. Well, look, this is YouTube, so take 20.
Uh, uh, okay, this is what historic progress looks like. You go from 10 to 20 words.
Yeah.
We can't say what socialism looks like because it's an aspiration.
Right.
We can say what it has looked like, and we can say what we would want it to look like. What it has looked like has not turned out to be what people wanted it to look like. Now, you can think of socialism narrowly or expansively. Narrowly, you can say, well, the countries that call themselves socialist are the socialist ones. Okay, that would be the Soviet bloc, China, and countries like that. Well, we know what they look like. We know what that is. It's a centrally planned economy in which there's a one-party state, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, aspirationally, we know nobody wants that. Nobody on the left wants that. That's a nice historical, I shouldn't say nice, it's a particular historical model, particular historical experience, and we need to study it and learn from it. But nobody on the left today thinks it, and the evidence for that is red baiting is over. No, you can't be red baited anymore because even the right wing knows that left today does not aspire to that model. All right, so then the second, the broader way of defining socialism is the way Sanders did, which is socialism is a set of institutions that embody a principle. That principle is people before profits. Right. Now, the institutions embodying that principle can be present even within capitalism to a greater or to a lesser extent. In countries like the Nordic countries, those principles were institutionalized to an enormous extent. In the countries like the United States, they barely got a foothold. So the basic principle behind socialism is, I said capitalism is a system in which everybody is dependent on the market, which is a vicious, brutal system.
Right.
Socialism is a set of institutions designed to not have people's fates hinge on their participation in the market. Key point, their fate should not hinge on their participation in the market. That does not mean that there's no place for the market. It just means that your fate doesn't hinge on it. Now, you can think of that in more or less ambitious terms. So a centrally planned economy was initially thought of as an economy in which we would just get rid of the market altogether, which means nobody's fate can hinge on the market. Turned out that didn't work. I believe it can't work. So the alternative then is to push back the scope of the market like a disease to the extent that we can. You learn to live with it the way you learn to live with an incurable virus, but you learn to control it and you learn to minimize its damage, and in some cases, even perhaps gain from certain advantages it might give you. But the basic idea is free people's fates from the vagaries of the market. Now, you wanted to know about Marxism.
Yeah, I wanted to, but actually, maybe before that, can we just a quick? So, I'll borrow from our mutual friend Bhaskar here, which is that it's undeniable the enormous achievements of the social democracies. I mean, that's and I think we actually need to spend more time acknowledging those great achievements because they are in fact great achievements, and we can complicate them and we can locate them in a global supply chain, and we can talk about their limits and all of these other very important things. But these countries delivered, and still actually, relatively speaking, deliver much better kind of basic standards than anywhere else. And at the same time, we've also seen this kind of broad rollback of the social democratic successes, say, starting in the late 70s up till today. And so, if I'm understanding Bhaskar correctly, he'll say, what sort of led me to Marxism and the idea of clawing more and more of the economy outside of that virus is because the rollback of the social democracies show that this virus is very hard to contain. So when we talk about containing it, what does it actually look like, particularly at a time when it's, we've been having corona capitalism for quite some time, right? It's sort of out of control everywhere and determining most of our landscape.
Yeah. I think that one of the things we can draw on from the social democratic experience is this, that While none of them abolished private property altogether, they did minimize its scope to a greater or lesser extent, depending on the country. Let's just look at certain key sectors, Michael, in our economy. Healthcare, transportation, the media. The days of the old media model is broken. We're going to have to either have a publicly funded media or we'll end up with no newsrooms pretty soon.
Yep.
Utilities is another one. Okay, in any sane bourgeois economy, even in a capitalist economy, these things should not be in the private sector. These goods and services should be distributed to people as citizenship rights. What does that mean exactly? It means you nationalize them. And we know we can because we have in the past. Now, suppose we nationalize these 5 key sectors. Depending on the country, we're talking about anywhere from 45 to 60% of the economy. You've taken 60% of the economy out of the control of capital. In doing so, you've not only given people access to these goods as rights, regardless of how much money they have, which is a huge democratic achievement. You've also dramatically reduced the political and economic clout of the capitalist class. Because what do they have to bring you to your knees at the end of the day when you try to enact progressive reform? What they have is the ability, which is like what I go into in my pamphlets, they have the ability to bring the economy to its knees because they control investment. The economy is nothing more than flows of investment. If you take half of it out of their hands, well, you haven't eliminated their power. They're still the single most powerful group, but you've given yourself breathing space. Right? So that's one way in which we can institutionalize this vision of pushing back the scope of the market, because it not only increases the stability, the security of people's lives, it also reduces the power of the wealthy to undercut these efforts when they decide they're not going to put up with it anymore.
So what is Marxism, and how does Marxism, if socialism is kind of some form of normative goal, people over profit, is Marxism like the machinery, the tactics, the strategy of how we do it?
It's related to it, but more specifically, think of socialism is the kind of car we want. We want a sports car that's got great power that goes 0 to 60 in 4 seconds.
Definitely.
Marxism is the engineering that tells us how to make it. So socialism tells us where we want to be, what our goal is, what our vision is of a humane and just society. Marxism is a theory that tells us why that is not achievable in capitalism. What is it about capitalism that makes it unachievable? If it was achievable inside capitalism, we would not be anti-capital. So Marxism tells you why it's not achievable. And this is where the current left is the weakest it's ever been, because it has no conception of it. And Marxism tells you, to some extent, how to get there. Because fundamentally, it tells you what politics is about. What makes Marxism distinctive as a political theory is that it says politics is fundamentally governed by material interests and the power, the capacity of people, their socially, materially determined capacity to act on their interests, which is different from a moralistic account, which is different from a cultural theory, which is different from an individualistic theory. So Marxism fundamentally is a theory of how capitalism works, how politics is organized, how the economy is organized, why it systematically squelches social justice and efforts towards justice. Based on that, it follows, well, then here's what you have to do to get more justice for yourself. And unlike socialism then, for socialists, Marxism should be either taken or rejected. It's either right or it's wrong. So I think socialists should have a very mercenary attitude towards Marxism, just like doctors have a mercenary attitude towards medical science. But socialism is our Hippocratic oath. It tells us what we're trying to achieve.
You just watched a Michael Brooks show video. Subscribe to get them all. Why wouldn't you? Don't be foolish. Click subscribe below and become a patron as well. Patreon.com/TMBS. Thanks, everybody.